Tensions are also rising in the Gulf. The United States has deployed soldiers to the region, around 3,000 soldiers to be precise. They arrived on board 2 warships on Sunday, the USS Bataan and the USS Carter Hall. One is an amphibious assault ship, the other is used for dock landing. Both vessels sailed into the Red Sea on Sunday. But what are they doing there? Countering Iranian aggression. Iran has been capturing oil tankers in the Gulf. How many? Around 20 in the last 2 years, according to Washington. So the US and its allies are worried. Oil prices are already high. The last thing they want is a tanker seizure. So what did Joe Biden do? He flexed his military muscles. He sent thousands of soldiers and multiple fighter jets to the region. Reports say the plan is to escort commercial tankers. How does that work? You deploy US Marines or soldiers on these ships. You raise the stakes for Iran. If they seize or attack these tankers, they could hurt American troops or worse, kill them. So the hope is that the escort will deter Tehran. And what is Tehran saying? Their foreign minister says the deployment is unnecessary and the Gulf nations can protect themselves.
The US military presence in the region has never been meant for maintaining security. Instead, their aim has always been to exacerbate insecurity and instability. Therefore, Iran's position is very clear. We believe in Gulf countries' ability to provide security for themselves and to design a collective security pattern without the presence of foreign troops.
Iran is not backing down. In fact, they're expanding their arsenal. The Iranian Navy has been equipped with a new missile. It's called the Abu Mahdi. It has a range of 1,000 kilometers. The latest showdown has massive implications, both for the US and for the rest of the world. The region we are talking about is this, the Strait of Hormuz. It is 39 kilometers long. It is a choke point between the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf. And why is it important? Because 20% of the world's oil passes through this strait. 20%. If there is fighting in Hormuz, all of us will feel the pinch. Iran knows this. They capture oil tankers for 2 reasons. One is tit for tat. The US often captures tankers containing sanctioned Iranian oil. When that happens, Tehran responds. The second reason is to put political pressure. We know how important oil prices are. Iran weaponizes this to gain concessions. They're doing that. Are they doing that now is the question. It's certainly a possibility. There was talk of an intermediate nuclear deal between Iran and the US. Maybe Tehran is angling for better terms. And if they are, it is the perfect time to do this. America's attention and resources are spread thin. They have a war in Eastern Europe. You have China knocking on Taiwan's doors. So Joe Biden has a lot on his plate. Plus, the American public is tired of West Asian wars. The US military largely pulled out of the region under Donald Trump. Their last carrier left West Asia in November 2020. The last Marine unit was pulled out in 2021. So it was the right time to test Biden's resolve. Would he re-enter the region or not? Well, this time he's decided to order massive deployments. It's definitely a signal of intent. You don't deploy 3,000 soldiers and fighter jets if you're half-hearted. Just one question though. Why? Biden has a re-election next year. Why would he risk being dragged into West Asia again? Reports say his allies want him to do this. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been cozying up to China. Biden needs to offer them something that China cannot, and that something is security. Safe passage for oil tankers. And where does that leave West Asia? In a more tense situation, certainly. The more deployments you have, the higher the risk of conflict. That's what happened in the 1980s, remember? Iran and the US were engaged in a tanker war. In 1988, the US attacked Iranian oil rigs. They also sank multiple ships. It was the largest US naval battle since the Second World War. My point is very simple. Risks are higher, but China and Russia will be enjoying this. More attention in West Asia means less attention in the Pacific or in Eastern Europe. It's something Joe Biden should be wary of. This is a place where starting a war is pretty easy, but ending one is nearly impossible. He's put thousands of soldiers and weapons in an old flashpoint. What he does next will be crucial. And now let's move from sound military strategies to absolutely absurd ones. The Taliban are amassing troops at the Afghanistan-Iran border. This comes amid heightened tensions between the two nations. The cause is a water dispute. The unusually high temperatures caused by global warming have led to water issues in both these countries, Afghanistan and Iran, and they're quarreling over water sharing. The countries have already traded barbs, even seen a few border skirmishes, but now things seem to be escalating. The Taliban have sent thousands of fighters to the border, and reports say there are hundreds of suicide bombers with them. Yes, suicide bombers. Clearly, old habits die hard. But seriously, what are the warlords in Kabul thinking? A water dispute requires negotiation and diplomacy to solve, not suicide vests. How can they expect to be taken seriously if their go-to strategy is to blow up both sides? Our next report brings you more details.
The Taliban are at it again, preparing their suicide bombers for a mission. But this mission is a bit unusual. It isn't just about causing terror. It's also about resolving a water dispute. Yes, all of us in the rest of the world must have got it backwards. We resolve water disputes by sending our diplomats to the field. We spend years chalking out water treaties, making sure all parties sit at the table and work out a deal that benefits everyone. It seems the Taliban would rather just blow up the negotiating table and their fighters along with it. Welcome to the wild world of suicide bomber diplomacy. Let's first look at how we got here. This is the Afghanistan-Iran border region. This river passes through it. It's called the Helmand in Afghanistan and the Hirmand in Iran. It comes from the Hindu Kush mountains in Afghanistan and supplies water to the Sistan and Balochistan regions of Iran. These are drought-prone areas that depend on the river's water. But Iran says it hasn't been getting its fair share. It accuses Afghanistan of hoarding the river's waters, and tensions have been high because of this water dispute. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi was in Sistan and Balochistan in May. He threatened the Taliban with retribution if water wasn't shared as previously agreed. Tehran demands that the Taliban respect a water-sharing treaty from 1973. The treaty guarantees Iran a share of the river's water, and it says this year it has only received 4% of the promised amount. That's why Iran is furious. The Taliban say that the treaty doesn't apply during drought years, which is true. The treaty only guarantees water during a normal water year. It's an old treaty. Normal is an ambiguous term. The logical thing to do would be to send negotiators to iron out a clearer deal. But, as you know, logic isn't the Taliban's strong suit. When Raisi made his statement, the Taliban mocked him. A prominent Taliban official offered a gift of a 20-litre water container in response and told Raisi to stop issuing ultimatums. The Taliban said that Iran is causing regional instability by making threats. This obviously didn't go down well with the Iranians. A week after this happened, a border skirmish took place. 2 Iranian guards and 1 Taliban member died. All this happened between mid-May and June. While all this empty bravado was on display, there was some proper diplomacy taking place as well. Afghanistan had completed a dam on the Helmand River in 2021. There's a water reservoir behind it, not too far from the border with Iran. In June, the Taliban had agreed to let an Iranian technical team visit the dam. Then, in early July, Iran said there had been no progress. Then late last month, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs made another statement. It said it had reached a preliminary agreement with the Taliban on water sharing, but it didn't give any details. And now we have troops gathering at the border, which begs the question, what is going on? Water sharing is complex, but it doesn't call for war. And it certainly doesn't call for suicide bombers at the borders. Are the bombers a pressure tactic by the Taliban? A way to strong-arm Tehran into agreeing to whatever has been discussed? Or is it just that the Taliban know no other way? This is a violent insurgent movement that has been fighting for decades. And now that they've taken over, they need to govern. But of course, the Taliban are better at gunslinging than governance. In the case of this water dispute, it seems the Taliban prefer death by suicide bomb to diplomacy, which only goes to show the warlords in Kabul are in over their heads.
Now let's tell you about an old mystery that is back in the headlines. It is called the Havana Syndrome. We live in a world full of mysterious phenomena, the Bermuda Triangle, the Loch Ness Monster. They capture the public imagination, but nothing beats the Havana Syndrome. It has diplomatic intrigue and a dash of paranoia. And what exactly is it? Well, the term Havana Syndrome was first coined in 2016. Havana as in the capital of Cuba. The first case was detected there, hence the Havana Syndrome. It was used to describe a series of unexplained health incidents. They started at the American Embassy in Cuba. Now, the symptoms are no laughing matter, even though they sound like a classic hangover: headache, dizziness, and some cognitive issues. The embassy staff said they heard strange sounds. They experienced weird sensations, all while sitting in their hotel rooms. And how did it happen? Well, that is the big mystery. No one knows. Since 2016, there have been 200 cases of the Havana Syndrome. 200 cases. It has been reported in Australia, Colombia, Russia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Poland, Serbia, Taiwan, China, Uzbekistan, even here in India. In 2021, the US Vice President Kamala Harris was visiting Vietnam. She was about to fly to Hanoi, but her flight got delayed. Do you know why? Because an American official in Vietnam reported the symptoms. So basically, it has been detected all over the world. If you watch sci-fi movies, you may have noticed how aliens only attack America. This is diplomacy's version of it. The Havana Syndrome only affects US diplomats and their families. No one else is harmed. So obviously, there's a lot of questions around it. Is it a genuine health concern, or is it just overthinking fueled by spy movies? Either way, the Havana Syndrome has the world in its grips, and now India is set to investigate it. It began with a petition in the Karnataka High Court. The petition was filed by a Bengaluru resident. It called for an inquiry into the syndrome in India. And the central government has responded to this. They have in fact agreed to investigate the matter. And here's something you must know. Till date, India has seen only one case of the Havana Syndrome. It was in 2021. The victim again was a US officer in New Delhi. He was part of CI Director William Burns's delegation. He's said to have experienced some weird symptoms, like the ones I described earlier. The officer even had to get some medical treatment, so it must have been serious. But the real intrigue lies in the alleged cause. Since the Havana Syndrome is only affecting US personnel, Washington jumped into action quickly. It looked at all the probable causes: secret weapons, psychological illness, nerve agents, enemy states. They explored all of it. At one point, this was a national security priority for the US. They blamed foreign powers. But soon that theory fizzled out. Do you know why? Because they had no evidence. It's been 7 years. They still have no evidence. The truth is still not out. The closest the US has come to an answer is microwave radiation. And even then, there is no evidence to back it. It almost sounds like a sci-fi movie where villains harness the power of sound to attack unsuspecting diplomats. Forget laser beams and invisible cars. The true weapon is the humble sound. And while we can make jokes about it, for the CIA, the Havana Syndrome is a very serious matter. They may not have found a reason yet, but it's not stopped them from compensating the victims. In 2021, US lawmakers passed a legislation. It was aimed at supporting victims of the syndrome. President Biden signed it into law the very same year. It's called the Havana Act in short, but the full form is a mouthful, and I will read it out for you. This is what it's called: the Helping American Victims Afflicted by Neurological Attacks Act, aka the Havana Act. Clearly, America spent more time on coining the acronym than probing the cause, but each victim with confirmed injuries is eligible to get, and listen to this, $180,000. It's a lot of money, especially for something that cannot even be proven. Now, India wants to investigate it and wants to find out more about this mysterious ailment. Is this an ailment really, or a case of cloak and dagger espionage? We say good luck. We also say reality is sometimes stranger than fiction. When I say Andaman and Nicobar Islands, what comes to mind? If you're an Indian, I can guess. A remote chain of islands, beautiful beaches, maybe even water sports. But what about marine warfare? Just last week, a Japanese destroyer visited Port Blair. That's the capital of Andaman and Nicobar. The military leaders held talks. The sailors, meanwhile, had a nice time of football and some yoga. Last month, another warship was in town, the French frigate Lorraine. The vessel made a port call at Port Blair, which begs the question, why the sudden interest in Andaman and Nicobar? To understand that, we must look at the geography. Andaman and Nicobar is an archipelago. It has 572 islands. The northernmost is close to Myanmar. The southernmost is close to Indonesia. It straddles two important oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. It is also close to a very important choke point, the Malacca Strait. This strip of water between Malaysia and Indonesia, this is the Malacca Strait. And why is it important? Because ships heading to China pass through here. Most of them carry oil. Around 80% of China's oil imports go via Malacca. You strangle Malacca, you strangle China. That's how it works. Which is why Andaman and Nicobar is so important. It is almost 1,200 kilometers away from mainland India, but that distance is the biggest advantage. From Andaman, you can keep tabs on Malacca. You can project military power. You can also run supply and reconnaissance missions. So the strategic value is huge. Why then did India never use it? Because it was never really necessary. China's Indian Ocean ambitions emerged in the last decade. They began sending fishing boats, patrols and submarines. In 2016, China built a military base in Djibouti. That's on the other side of the Indian Ocean, in the Horn of Africa. The next year, in 2017, they got the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Suddenly, China was all around us. That's when New Delhi began realizing the potential of Andaman and Nicobar. So what are they doing about it? The first priority is to improve the infrastructure. The Navy has an air station on this island called Campbell Bay. It has a 3,500 feet long runway. It is now being upgraded to 10,000 feet. You can't operate bigger planes without long runways. In January, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh was at this air station. He reviewed the upgrade progress. A second runway is also being built, another 10,000 feet one in the southern islands. These new runways will be crucial to hosting military planes. In 2020, a US aircraft landed there for refueling, a surveillance plane called P-8 Poseidon. It was the first such mission on Andaman and Nicobar. Some Indian assets are also deployed there, like the Sukhoi fighter jets and the Jaguar planes. In many ways, Andaman is perfect for the job. It is the only place in India with a joint command. And what does that mean? All three services of Indian military operate under a single leadership there. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force. All these assets report to a single command. In the mainland, that's not the case. Each service reports to its own leadership. Experts say joint commands are better in the long run. There is more synergy, more clarity. Andaman and Nicobar already has that. This year, a major joint military exercise was held there. It involved the Army, the Navy, the Air Force and the Coast Guard. So the thought process is right, and it's not just military investments. Civilian infrastructure is also getting a boost. The government says it has invested 30,000 crore rupees in the last decade in Andaman and Nicobar. The plan is to invest another 10,000 crores. A transshipment hub, an international airport, a solar power plant are all in the works. Other countries are also investing, by the way. Japan, for example, is funding a power project. Quick side note, Tokyo actually captured Andaman and Nicobar in 1942. This was during the Second World War. They realized the strategic importance even then, 1942. Almost 80 years later, the world is also realizing the same thing. They're calling Andaman and Nicobar an unsinkable carrier, a formidable outpost to counter China. But words alone are not enough. The islands need major military upgrades to serve such a purpose. More military assets, more surveillance tech, more infrastructure. If not, it's a waste of strategic value. Something strange happened last week. The United Nations Security Council held a special meeting. It wasn't about Russia's war. It wasn't about the coup in Niger. It wasn't about any conflict. This meeting was about food security. Now, when the Security Council discusses food, you know it's a big problem. Just how big? Let me tell you. Around 780 million people in the world are hungry. 780 million are hungry. That's 1 in 10 people. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. Around 345 million people are facing acute hunger. That's borderline starvation. This number has doubled since 2020. And of these people, around 49 million are on the brink of famine. These are unprecedented levels. The World Food Programme was set up in 1963. Since then, global hunger has never been this high. So why now? Well, one reason is the population. When overall population rises, so does the hungry population. But that alone is not causing this. Two man-made problems are fueling this crisis: conflict and climate change. Around 70% of the hungry population lives in regions affected by war, places like Yemen, Congo, Chad, Niger. It's a fact of life. Where there is war, there is hunger. And the war in Ukraine is making things worse. Ukraine makes up around 10% of global wheat exports, plus around 15% of corn exports. Most of this went to the developing world, but it's not going there anymore. Last month, Russia withdrew from the Black Sea grain deal. They've stopped Ukraine from exporting food, and this is the result: a resurgent food crisis. Wheat prices are up nearly 10%. Millions of tons of wheat are stuck in Ukraine. Think about how absurd that is. 780 million people are hungry, yet wheat is just rotting away because of war. That's one problem. The second cause is climate change. 2023 has seen some of the worst heat waves. Last month, July, was the hottest on record. This erratic weather is affecting output. Wheat yield is expected to fall around 20% in the next 2 decades and around 40% by 2080. So our population is rising, but our food production is falling. Obviously, that is bad news. These two factors have forced countries to take drastic calls. India, for example, we've banned the export of two important grains, wheat and non-basmati white rice. Both decisions were crucial. India makes up around 40% of global rice exports. That's around 22 million tons. A big chunk of that is non-basmati white rice. Imagine that supply disappearing overnight. The effects are already visible. Rice prices are up almost 20% compared to January. It's the highest level since 2011. So here's the bottom line. Climate change is reducing our output. War is affecting our supply lines. If you add these two, what do you get? A global food crisis, that's what you get. If you produce food, you can escape this somehow. Like India or the United States, you can control your exports and keep more to yourself. But that's a luxury. More than 130 countries are net importers of food, meaning they buy more than they sell. These countries are at the mercy of global factors. When Russia pulls out of the grain deal, these countries are helpless. Same when India bans rice exports, or when Ukrainian grain depots are destroyed. And don't think this is temporary. The effects of today's hunger will be felt forever through malnutrition, through stunted growth, through reduced immunity. So the solution cannot be slow or delayed. It must come now. And how will that happen? In an ideal world, Putin will have a change of heart. World leaders will pump trillions into climate action. But let's face it, neither is going to happen. Going forward, climate change will be the biggest villain. Just look at what's happening in China. There are devastating floods in the country's northeast. This region is often called China's granary, but right now it is underwater. Thousands of hectares of crops have been destroyed. The wheat harvest is down 1%. It is the first time in 7 years that China's summer output is down, and this is really bad news. China is the world's largest producer of rice and wheat, but all of it is consumed at home. In fact, even the local production is not enough. China ends up importing food anyway. It is a net importer of food items. The good news is Beijing has the means. They have the money to buy food from abroad, but many countries in Africa and Asia do not have that luxury. They don't just need food, they need affordable food. It's one area where the world is going backwards. We actually made some great progress in the last 50 years. In 1970, around 33% of people in developing countries were hungry. By 2015, this number was down to 12%, from 33 to 12%. How did we achieve that? Through consistent investment. But those gains have been eroded in the last 3 years. Global hunger has risen 119%, 119% since the pandemic. How do we correct this? By investing more money. In this case, throwing money at the problem is important. Whether it's climate action or buying food grains or investing in new technology, we need that money. We're not investing enough money. Last year, the United Nations raised around $14 billion to feed the hungry. It was an all-time record, 14 million. But guess how much the target was? 40 billion. 40. I know it's a lot, but if governments want to, they can spare this money. If you take out 5% of America's military budget, you can end hunger for 1 year, just 5%. Also, oil companies, they made $100 billion in profits in the first quarter of 2023. That's $100 billion in 3 months. So don't think money is not available. It's all about priorities. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Space Research Organisation, or ISRO, has released images of the moon captured by Chandrayaan-3. In Australia, a space object lit up the sky above Melbourne. The Australian Space Agency said it is a remnant of a Russian Soyuz 2 rocket re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And people usually keep dogs to chase away burglars. But what happens when the dog is irresistibly cute? A burglar in the United States faced a similar situation. He paused the burglary to sneak in a cuddle session. You have to see what happened next. And finally, what makes the 8th of August significant? On this day in 1942, the father of India, Mahatma Gandhi, launched the Quit India movement. It was a civil disobedience movement aimed to end the British rule in India. The British resorted to violent means to thwart this movement, but it initiated widespread acts of non-cooperation. We leave you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Buddy. Yeah, we don't want to do that. Alright. Because you're so cool. Come here. Because you're the coolest dog I've ever known. I love you too. You're a sweetheart. How about you come home with me? I'm going to